Hey, what's up YouTube? The DIY guy here, and today we're going to be working on a 2014 Honda Civic, but this one is going to be a video about more of a cosmetic issue. My wife has tapped a parking pole, so as you can see on the front corner here, we have some scuffs on the paint. We have these marks here, and what I'm going to do is show you how to get these out as long as it hasn't gouged into the paint. If it's mostly on the surface, we can hopefully get most of that out and get it looking better. So the first thing we're going to do is wash the car, and then we'll get to work on that. Okay, so the car is washed now. We're in a little bit better shade. So next, I'm going to do a series of steps here. Now, the next step I'm going to do is to clay bar the car. The other thing you can also use, so there's this clay here, which is just, you can get that at the auto parts store to remove things out of the paint. The other thing you can use is called a Nanoskin. It's just a sponge with like a rubber here. Then you use the Meguiar's Quick Detailing. You need a lubricant to let it glide over the paint. So I'm just going to work on this area here. So I'm just going to use the Nanoskin instead of the clay. They both do the same thing. But basically, work that area and it'll take things off the surface that are embedded in the paint. So when we're working in there, it'll take it off. And then we're going to finish that off with a microfiber towel. Okay, so I've worked that area with the Nanoskin. Now I'm going to take my microfiber towel and dry that off. Just work that whole area, clean it off good. All right, now the next step I'm going to do is try to get some more paint off with this isopropyl alcohol. So I'm going to take some on an old microfiber towel, an older one, and again I'm going to rub that in and try to get any of the paint off the surface with the microfiber towel. And you can see over here some of the paint that's just on the surface. You might not be able to see it, but some of the yellow paint is coming off. Right, actually, yeah. So you can see here, the yellow paint is coming off. You might be able to see it here if I go close up. See how that's coming off there? So little by little, we're going to be getting most of this off here, unless it's scraped into the clear coat. So I'm going to work on this another minute with, there we go. So you can see you got a little bit more off with the alcohol. There. So work on that for a few minutes, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, I think we've got most of the surface paint off. And again, this is only if you have scraped into it, like down here, or any gouges in the clear coat, you're not going to be able to get those out with just rubbing some of this stuff on here. This is really just to get the surface paint off here. Now you can see up here I've also got a scrape. But the next step we're going to do is to lightly wet sand this and polish it. And I'll get the sandpaper and the polishing tools for that. Okay, now the next step I'm going to do is wet sanding this. Now this is like a 3000 grit sandpaper. It's more like a sponge. It's a 3M. You can get this at the auto parts store, but it's more like a sponge. It doesn't feel like paper. And you want to keep that wet. Now don't do this step because it is going to dull the finish where you sand. Don't do this step unless you have a compound to bring back the shine, which I'll show you in the next step. But again, this will dull the finish while you're sanding it. So you want to make sure that you have that compound for the next step to bring that shine back. Okay, now keeping this wet, I'm going to go in smooth strokes back and forth across the surface wherever that I saw any of the paint damage from the pole. Now let's do that for a few minutes until you can feel it smooth on there. Okay, spent a couple minutes on that. Now I'm drying it off with the microfiber towel. You can't tell so much on a white car, especially if it's not direct sunlight, but definitely you can see it on the darker cars and when the sunlight hits it directly, so it is dulling the clear coat a little bit, but that gets everything out of the surface as much as I can get with that. Now I'm going to bring it back. Before I do any kind of touch-ups, I'm going to also run the polisher over this and put some compound on it. Okay, so it's time to compound. So you need a few tools for this part. Most important one is having, this is the Porter Cable dual action polisher. This is the 7424 XP. It's pretty common one, pretty popular. I'll put the link to all these things from Amazon. I'll put them down in the description. So that's the dual action polisher. Now on that you're going to need a pad. I have a collection of pads for all different purposes. For this application I'm going to use the orange pad. And now these pads, based on color and their density for different purposes, I do have a backing plate here that has the Velcro pad sticking on there with the Velcro pad. The next thing you're going to need is a compound. Again, I have a whole collection of things based on what I need to do if I'm trying to just do a high gloss or just take out some scratches. I like the Menzerna heavy cut compound for something like this, along with the orange pad. Does a pretty good job of removing most swirl marks, minor scratches, and things like that. So I'm going to work on this first and work it in there good. So first thing I'm going to do is put it on, a few dabs on there. Start it off on low speed where you can adjust this down like at 2, and I'm going to work it up to 5. But I first want to get that worked on there. And we're going to work it back and forth in a crisscross pattern. So we're going to go back and forth, then we're going to go up and down. Now I just want to show you another option. If you want to start off more aggressive, you can use this Meguiar's correction compound along with a microfiber pad. So that's a little more aggressive. If we start with this, then we would move to the foam pad with the heavy cut compound. So each one of these you want to move from most aggressive to least aggressive. Okay. After working on that for a few minutes, I've got the shine back in it. I'm going to wipe that off with a microfiber towel. Get that off there good. And you can see that it's got everything off the surface. The only thing I've got left is, and you can see these gouges here. Now these are actually gouges in the paint. Some things down here along the edge, and then one thing down there, but everything else is pretty much out of the paint. So that's as good as we're going to do on the surface damage. Now the last step we're going to do is just touch up some of those scrapes and things that are into the paint all the way in. Okay, now before we do any of the touch-up paint, again I'm going to clean any of these spots off where it's going to be touch-up paint. Take that isopropyl rubbing alcohol, put it on there just to make sure you get all the polishing compound out of there before you try to touch it up. Alright. Now the next step, final step before we seal it, I guess, is I've got the original Honda Touchup paint here. This is the matching color code. I went with the, rather than an aftermarket paint, I went with the original Honda paint. I've got that applicator, but I also using a couple of toothpicks here, and I kind of pound the end of them with a hammer just to get them a real fine flat tip on those. And we're going to touch up those spots. Well, now you can use the applicators that come with the touch-up paint after you shake it all up, but it always seems to put on too much, so that's why I like to get the flattened out toothpick here. Just put a little bit on the end of that. Now, less is more when you're doing this. You don't want to put too much on there. You'll have a big glops of paint, so try to keep a real steady hand. And just get the tip of it on there and go in the lines of that paint. Okay, so the paint was a little sticky and didn't flow well with either one of those applicators. So I wiped it off with the isopropyl alcohol again. You can start over. I'm going to use a very fine paintbrush here. It's a little bit better tip than the other one, and this one is a little bit easier to get in those very narrow. Works better. Again, just enough to cover it. If you want to do a couple coats, that's better, because then you won't see the line. And just let that in there, and just let that flow in there. Now I'm going to touch up all the other little edges around here. I got a few nicks over here to touch up. Some along the edge here. And then, let's see if I can move this over here. And we got some down here. Just a real fine tipped paintbrush. Let's put just the tiniest amount on there and just let it flow in. Again, so you don't want the globs on here. Takes a steady hand. So work around and just get all the little spots, and then we'll come back and finish this up. Okay, now that's the last step. As you can see, looks pretty good. There's nothing that would indicate it had hit a pole. If you look closely, of course, you could see the scratches, but really from a few feet away, you can't see anything. So the last step, if you wanted to, you can use these paint tubes. Usually the paint's on this end and they have the clear coat on this end. So you could, after that paint dries, you can put a little bit of clear coat on there to touch that, to seal that in, and put some wax on it later. And that's it. So if you have any comments, leave them down below in the comments. I will put a link in the description to all the products that I used for this. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I appreciate it.